So Disenchantment Part 4 came out recently, and there's a lot to say about it more broadly, but that's not what I'm going to be doing in this video. No, I'm going to be hyper-focusing on a couple of tiny moments, and using them to suggest both a theory for how the show will end, and that the show actually displays some pretty based political stances against real-world historical colonialism and imperialism. So let's get started. After escaping hell in the season opener, Bean and co arrive in a familiar place, Alva Gunderson's office in Steamland. We've been here before, of course, in parts 2 and 3, and it's a fascinating location, not least through the way this retro-futurist steampunk city seems to have progressed so far beyond the rest of this world by harnessing the power from an abundance of naturally occurring steam. But Bean's confused. Why is there a direct elevator between the office of Steamland's de facto ruler and, hell itself? Well, that's answered in this moment.
We're neighbours, that's all. You don't get to choose your neighbours. Yes, that's it. Besides, hell puts the steam in Steamland. Everyone knows that, geothermal chambers and all.
Steamland is powered by hell. Let me tell you why that's such a fascinating detail to include. When we're first introduced to this city, it's a lot to take in. We're treated to an extended, almost ekphrastic sequence where the camera accompanies Bean through the streets and levels of this city, and it's pretty breathtaking for both us and our protagonist. Bean's impressed because she comes from a bit of a backwater kingdom, one built from mud and stone instead of glass and steel. But even from our perspectives, this place is stunning visually. There's an astonishing level of detail and a richness of palette which makes Steamland equally awe-inspiring to the modern eye. But this visual spectacle isn't a wholly original one, because the Steamland aesthetic is directly evocative of Victorian London. Well, maybe not directly evocative, it's filtered through the wider steampunk aesthetic, but that itself is also largely a mediation of 18th and 19th century literature, particularly depictions and descriptions of cities like the British capital and their industrial and locomotive technologies. But Disenchantment Steamland does appear to be a direct visual reference to 19th century megacities like the aforementioned London or Paris. Just look at the graphic design of the advertisements. That sense of amazement we share with Bean actually mirrors eyewitness accounts of people seeing some of Victorian London's most incredible spectacles. For instance, here's an excerpt from Charlotte Bronte's account of the famed Great Exhibition. "It is a wonderful place, vast, strange, new, and impossible to describe. Its grandeur does not consist in one thing, but in the unique assemblage of all things. Whatever human industry has created, you find here, from the great compartments filled with railway engines and boilers, with mill machinery in full work, with splendid carriages of all kinds, with harness of every description, to the glass-covered and velvet-spread stands loaded with the most gorgeous work of the goldsmith and silversmith, and the carefully guarded caskets full of real diamonds and pearls worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. It seems as if only magic could have gathered this mass of wealth from all the ends of the earth, as if none but supernatural hands could have arranged this with such a blaze and contrast of colours and marvellous power of effect." Now, I don't know about you, but parts of this description and the general tone of it seem to match pretty well with the sense of amazement we share with Bean upon first seeing Steamland. The thing is though, while this general steampunk aesthetic, evoking the industrializing megacities of the 18th and 19th centuries, is fairly common, fiction utilizing this aesthetic can sometimes do so on a very superficial level. In a lot of cases, the idea doesn't go much deeper than, wow, look how cool this retro-futurist steam city is. Imagine riding a Zeppelin, what a world. It's a little rarer that steampunk works actually recognize or engage with the darker trappings of that aesthetic's inspirations. The reason these 19th century metropolises were so awe-inspiring, so rich, so developed, was almost invariably exploitation on a grand scale. I don't just mean the workhouses, the Oliver Twist-style domestic cruelties of the age. I mean colonialism and imperialism. It's often said that London was built on money stolen from India, and honestly that's pretty accurate. According to the economist Sus Splendour, across its colonial ventures in the subcontinent, Britain extracted somewhere in the region of $45 trillion worth of wealth. That's why London grew so rich and fancy. So when we see steampunk cities, fictional worlds built on the bedrock of these Victorian aesthetics and visuals, places like Steamland, there's always an unacknowledged darkness at the core of this, because the corollary of a richly developed and fabulous city is the exploitation, the suffering, and the cruelty which was directly responsible for these places in our own history. Here's where we get back to that moment in Disenchantment.
Start talking, Alpha. I want names, dates, 3 beers, and a bowl of nuts.
When we'd seen Steamland in parts 2 and 3, we'd seen the magnitude and splendour of the city, but we'd also seen pockets of cruelty in its society, like the inhumane, alienating factory Bean infiltrates, or the discriminatory freak show Elfo gets trapped in. But in this moment, at the start of part 4, we're explicitly told that the success and prosperity of Steamland isn't due to their having brighter minds, or a more virtuous workforce, but thanks to a deal with hell itself. The fabulous vistas we'd seen upon first entering the city, and its technological advancement, were only ever possible as a result of a literal deal with the devil. Just as the similar wealth and splendour of Steamland's real-world inspirations were only achieved via a metaphorical deal with the devil, the outrageously exploitative colonial and imperial practices of industrial Europe. This moment then reframes this entire corner of the Disenchantment world. No longer is Steamland merely an example of steampunk aesthetics, but it now recognises and implicitly condemns the dark underbelly of that aesthetic and its inspirations. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Wow, Pillar of Garbage, this is a stretch, even for you. You're taking one brief singular moment and using it to extrapolate out a whole political anti-colonial framework? That's nuts. Well, the thing is, it isn't just this one moment. Part 4 of Disenchantment is many things, not all of them positive, but one thing we do see more of in these new episodes is a greater focus on some of the ideas of conquest and racial conflict that, in this world until now, had more or less remained in the background. And one of the details which had been teased previously, but is now out in the open, is the fact that Zog's ancestors stole Dreamland and its castle from the elves. This is their ancestral home, but the humans have reduced them to living in a slum. As this secret becomes increasingly known, though, it seems more and more that the elves are understandably unhappy with this status quo, even Elfo, and this creates tension with the reigning princess/queen Bean. Because Bean, like Zog before her, seems content to maintain her control of this ancient elf homeland. But crucially, I think we see her mind start to change. I'm summarising, but upon discovering the skeletons of elves and mermaids massacred by the humans under Dreamland Castle, she actually sees a vision of these creatures being wiped out. And perhaps because the lightning effect suggests the murderer is somehow connected to herself, Bean seems genuinely affected by this past tragedy for the first time, and going forward seems increasingly uncertain about the right way to deal with the increasing tensions with the elves over this past atrocity. It aligns perfectly with that earlier, seemingly throwaway moment whereby Steamland's original sin is revealed. Because if that Steamland deal with the devil is understood as a comment on the evils which underpinned similar settings in real-world history, then this visceral vision of Dreamland's own quasi-genocidal past seems to convey a very similar message, that success and power built on the foundations of past evils remain tied to those evils, and that historical cruelties such as colonial exploitation or genocide don't just go away, that the legacies of acts like this tend to find a way of bubbling up to the surface.
Dreamland Castle is rightfully ours.
We'll take it by force. Please gasp.
I think these two moments in part 4 point to the future direction of the show. I think that as the Og line reaches its end with Bean, due to her close personal connections with both an elf and a mermaid, the show will end with her symbolically refounding Dreamland as a place for elves and mermaids, perhaps even abdicating herself to allow a ruler or rulers more closely connected to these other groups. Looking at you, Broom Girl. And moreover, I think these moments establish Disenchantment as a show which, despite its light-hearted appearance, actually considers the real-world ethical implications of the fantasy tropes it employs, and every now and then comes to a pretty based conclusion. So maybe this is still a bit of a stretch, but honestly I don't think it's a very big one. Feel free to disagree though, and let me know what you think below. I'll probably end up making like 1 or 2 more videos on Disenchantment Part 4, so stick around if you like this one, and smash that like button like it's the back of Jerry's head. Thanks as always to my patrons, especially Ian Fifield, and I'll see you soon.